Hi, I'm Georgie Dickens, host of Stratospheric Leaders, the podcast where I get to have inspired conversations with extraordinary leaders from across capital markets. Join me to hear their game-changing strategies, the personal stories and powerful sound bites behind their stratospheric success. Every episode packed with wisdom, insight and real-world lessons, the stuff they simply don't teach you in business school. If you want to elevate your game and most importantly, those around you, this podcast is for you. Enjoy. In this episode, I sit down with the extraordinary Dr. Kay Swinburne, Baroness Swinburne, for a powerful conversation. From her working class beginnings in West Wales, helping in the family bakery, to senior roles in finance, politics, and now as chair of the Association of British Insurers, Kay's journey is anything but ordinary. A former MEP who helped shape landmark financial legislation like MiFID II and EMIR, Kay shares how serendipity, grit, and relentless drive have shaped her path, including founding a hedge fund whilst raising 2 children, and in 2023 being invited to the House of Lords by the Prime Minister himself. Dubbed the accidental politician, Kay reflects on leadership, legacy, and why true success is always a team effort. This was such an enjoyable conversation. I took so many notes. It's one you're not going to want to miss. Enjoy. I am delighted to welcome you to an episode of Stratospheric Leaders. Now, you and I first met around, well, it was just at the beginning of COVID. We were both at an event. You were one of the keynotes. I was running a session. And we've become firm friends ever since. You are certainly one of my go-to people, part of my inner tribe or trusted tribe when I need a sounding board, advice. You've had a distinguished career covering politics, finance, hedge funds, farmers. We'll be covering many of the defining moments through your career today. I am so excited to have you here today because based on the advice you give me, I know that there are going to be many gems that are shared. And as I said, you've had a very distinguished career. And I want to go back to where did it all start? So before you were any kind of paid employment, what was your first ever job?
So I grew up in a family business. So my parents, when I was about 4, took on a new business that was established, but they took it on for themselves. And that was a high risk for them. But I grew up in a household where my parents worked long hours. And I, as the middle child, my brother seemed to have got away with a lot more than I did, but as the middle child, I was always called upon to come and actually help out. They had a bakery and a shop, and so I would actually be doing a lot of behind the scenes, filling the shelves, weighing all the potatoes, doing all the jobs that nobody else really wanted to do, I would be given to do. So I learned very early on the value of hard work, and also realised that my parents to the outside world, including to their staff, always looked calm and collected and everything seemed to be going according to plan. But behind the scenes, we knew that was not the case, that it was all very much, hands to the deck and lots of panic and lots of worry behind the scenes. So for me, it also taught me a lot about being a swan. That, that outside to the world, giving confidence to everybody around you that, yes, this is going fine. But inside that turmoil of, maybe this isn't going to work. Maybe, things are not happening the way they should be. That turmoil of paddling, frantically underneath the water was something I learned very early on. So I'd like to think I'm more often the swan rather than being seen to be frantic about things.
And to your point, I think being the swan, people look to leaders for confidence, for certainty. The same with, when we're younger, we look to our parents and that calmness and composure because emotions are contagious. So it's we want to make sure that ours are, one's worth catching. And you also said, I teach my children this, whether they listen or not is quite another question, but hard work is a minimum. There are many people that desire success. There are few that are prepared to do what it takes to get there. And I look at, my children and sometimes there's this lazy ambition. I'm like, no, hard work is a minimum.
It really is. But I grew up in a household where it was very obvious that hard work was the only way to make things pay. And so that work ethic was instilled in me from a very early age. It's very difficult with the next generation when you've had a successful career to then try and instill that same hunger into them. And I think in some ways I had it easy. I grew up in West Wales in quite a difficult time, with risks being taken by my parents, but also economically, it wasn't a very prosperous time for West Wales. So all of these things meant that in order for me to actually thrive, I had to leave. So these are things that gave me real aspiration. It gave me a drive. It gave me that energy to actually make something of myself. So my school motto all those years ago was reach for the stars. And I think I'm still trying to do that.
I love that. And as you know, you're part of Women in Leadership Global, and every cohort is named after a constellation of stars. So there's something there about reach for the stars, dream big. You mentioned your family's business was a bakery. What was your favourite thing you used to like to eat from the bakery? Because I am partial to bread, but what was your favourite treat?
So I've now realised that they're not very good for me because I have a gluten intolerance, but there used to be a jam and cream slice with icing on the top that I used to be very partial to as a child.
Very nice. Okay, well, that's making me hungry. It's nearly lunchtime. And when you were, in your younger years, the hard work as a minimum, you learned the calmness, the outer projection of confidence. What did you, as I said, you've had such an interesting and diverse career. What did you dream of becoming, when you were a child?
So my initial thoughts were that I wanted to be a doctor. In the community I grew up in West Wales, the doctors, the GPs at the time were actually the cornerstone of the community. And so I wanted to be a GP. I wanted to be that person that people went to with their problems. And then I realised when I was about 15, when I spent a week with my local GP doing house calls, that I really wasn't cut out for this. I don't respond very well I have a really bad gagging reflex. So if anybody is ill around me, I tend to follow suit. It's not a very good trait for a GP or anybody working in the health service. So I realised very early on that practically it wasn't the right thing for me. So I had to pivot and actually think about other areas that would give me the same intellectual stimulus as medicine and the whole area. And so I landed on pharmaceuticals and decided very early on I wanted to be the CEO of a major pharmaceutical company, and that was going to be my aspiration going forwards. Haven't managed to do that, but there's still time for me to actually maybe chair something going forwards.
Yeah, and I'm going to add one word to what you've just said there. I haven't managed to do that yet, because maybe that is written in the stars. You talked about, the stars. And as you've traversed your career, I'm sure, many people over the years have offered you advice. What is a piece of advice that's been shared with you that has really stayed with you?
So when I first had my children and trying to juggle founding and running a hedge fund with having two young children a year apart, that for me was a time when there was a lot of personal pressure. And someone gave me the advice that those that mind don't matter and those that matter don't mind. And I know you and I have shared this before, but it really does resonate with me. And every time I get stressed about small things not being perfect, I now actually stop and think that thought. Because genuinely, if people really care about you, then the little things, they really don't matter. Whereas if people think it matters, I really shouldn't be caring.
Yeah. Can you say that again? It's those that matter don't mind and those that mind don't matter.
Absolutely.
It's so powerful, isn't it? Because it's often we can, not everyone's going to like us or nor do we like everyone. And it's I can find myself sometimes getting fixated on the view of one, rather than the majority. And the view of one isn't representative of the view of many. And I remember my coach once said to me, the importance of leverage the believers. There are going to be people that doubt, people who, just you trigger them for whatever reason. That's okay, but don't bleed energy on that, because it's just not a productive use of time.
And it's important that to realise you don't have to be perfect all of the time. you can show up as you are rather than actually trying to meet those goals of perfection. And I think, I'm certainly my own worst enemy when it comes to judging myself. I suspect others are less callous than I am to myself.
And do you think that perfectionism, it's interesting, you say that word, and it's something that I really deeply connect to as well. Do you think that's also been a contributor to your success?
I suspect it has, on the basis that I push myself very hard. I would push myself harder than I would ever expect a team member to do so. Good has never been good enough for me. So it's always been driving myself to my limits, to find out where they are, to actually make sure that I really am reaching as high as I possibly can. And settling has never been good enough. Therefore, I do try and reach those standards, never ever get to perfection, but I'd like to think I have a very good try at it.
And what you shared there, that's where we see our limits. Let's find our limits, and let's be boundless. Let's push those. And for me, I think perfectionism, it's a strength, and it has a shadow side. So it's recognizing, where does it move from the realm of being helpful, like healthy ambition, pushing us, to where does it then step into I'm not good enough? That we can then move into doubt or self-doubt that can at times be even quite debilitating.
No, it is, but I think as my career has progressed, I would have defined my success and therefore my drive to perfectionism, sort of trying to manage that success. Historically, when I was younger, it would always be about the results I was seeing and being at the table and making an impact. And I think as I've got older and more confident in my leadership skills, I now am in a different phase where it's more about reputation, legacy. Have I done enough to open doors for other people? Have I done enough to challenge the companies I work with so that they are, innovating, that they are moving on, that they're adapting, that they're evolving? Is that something that I can be proud of? And those are very different goals and ways of measuring your output than I would have had when I first started my career.
And to your point, things change over time, don't they? It's, our 20s, goals might be making money to buy a house, get married, or whatever the goals are. But, and I think what you shared there, I love that way, reputation, legacy. Have I opened doors for others? And where do you feel you're at with your reputation, legacy?
Oh, I've got a long way to go. I have got a long, long way to go.
That's the perfection coming out.
Yes, but actually it's also what gets me up in the mornings. It's what gets me engaged in all of the companies I'm working with and, the roles I'm taking on. And you go through different phases in your career, and I'm at that really, what I consider to be a privilege right now of starting a non-exec career and an advisory career. So the plural stage of my life, rather than, having one company that you're dedicated to. And that is a genuine privilege. So, it gets me out of bed in the morning. These are the things that I now know I need to challenge myself every day and challenge those around me every day. It's a good thing.
And I love that, challenge myself every day, because again, if we're reaching for the stars, it is always about challenging ourselves. And you've had such an interesting career. As I said, it crosses many different sectors. And I'm going to ask this, and I'm sure, what have been the defining moments? I'm sure there are many, but what are the moments that have really left an imprint for you?
So most of the big moments in my career and therefore involved change have been serendipitous. So I haven't planned them. And as a big planner and a control freak, that's actually, for me, when I look back, is an unusual thing. That it's been serendipity. I have unexpectedly met someone who's offered me an opportunity that I then had to say, well, should I do this? This isn't in my comfort zone. Should I go and try something completely new? And so, I was referred to as the accidental politician. I was, a financial person through and through. I'd spent all of my career specialising in pharmaceuticals, but in the financial services sector, either as a banker or as a fund manager. And suddenly I meet David Cameron as leader of the opposition, and he says, why don't you come and actually help me, perform a function that brings the real world into the political world. Somebody who's got different experiences, who can actually guide the legislation in a different way. And it was a challenge. And so he calls me the accidental politician. And I think to this day, it does make me smile. But my most defining moments ended up being when I was elected to the European Parliament in 2009, in the shadow of, the great financial crash. Therefore, you're actually putting in place once in a lifetime legislation for financial services. So I find myself as Vice Chair of the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee through successive Eurozone crises, through major things that were happening. And for the first time, Brussels was legislating for financial services, which was really important for London as a global financial centre. So, actually taking that UK's voice to the table and making sure that the legislative agenda was suitable and fit for purpose for London as a global financial centre was a real great privilege, and I really enjoyed that. That was probably one of my most defining, I guess I can pinpoint exactly what I did. So it is a real defining career change for me.
And the accidental politician, I feel that's a memoir. Like that feels like that I can see that on a book cover. And you shared there when there's that serendipity, and it's been about stepping outside your comfort zone, because people can see something in you, your talents, your skills, your experiences, and also your potential. What's been the lesson you'd give to a mentee or someone that came to your advice about, I want to take on this new role, but it's outside my comfort zone. I'm nervous. I'm worried. Like, what if it goes wrong?
But stretch is a really good thing. And doing something in a slightly different field makes you take all your skills with you. So all the skills you've learned already in life and all the skills you've learned in every part of your career, you take with you to that new opportunity. And therefore, you're not starting afresh. You're taking all of those skills, you're applying them to a slightly different area. But the reality is, I think it makes you more rounded and you come with a different perspective, which is really important. And for me, that allows you to challenge the status quo. It allows you to look for ways to do things differently, to do things more productively, to be more efficient, and to really raise the bar, to think genuinely about questions, to question the way that people are doing things right now. And I think it's a great thing. So when I've got mentees saying to me, and I worked at a big four firm where they would give me a large number of mentees from all areas of the company to speak with, and I would just say to them, listen, if you think you're ready, even a little bit of you is ready, then go and do it, because you have to actually push and stretch yourself.
And what about those moments of doubt where it's like, don't do it? If we're human beings, we have a heartbeat. Unless we're completely narcissistic, we'll have those moments of doubt, and that voice can sometimes be, dialed up on loud, a repeating pattern. What do you do in those? What do you do personally when you have those moments of self-doubt?
But I think the key message here is we all do have them. It doesn't matter how senior you are, you still have those moments of self-doubt. So for me, it's a question of what is coming up in my day or that week or that month that is really important. So prioritizing the things that are really important. And then when you've got your list of priorities, your top few priorities, you sit there and say, okay, how can I approach this? You break it down. You take it down into manageable pieces. And then all of a sudden, it's not about self-doubt anymore. It's about execution. And I can execute. And most people, have got enough experience under their belt that they can execute the plan that they've just made. So I think, breaking it down, making sure that you actually understand what's being asked of you, and making sure you've prioritized in that first place, because you can't do everything for everybody at the same time.
Yeah, there's so many yes, and it's interesting because often we can have so many competing demands. But I what you said there, I think is there's several things to underscore, but making sure you're clear on what the ask of you is, because I think sometimes we can live in the world of assumptions, or something's asked of us, but like, are we aligned with expectations, or are we operating in the grey? So really having that alignment of this is, shared understanding is so critical in order that you're prioritizing on the things that matter and on the right things. And when you look at leadership, you've been a senior leader for many, many years. I asked you earlier, what's the advice that's kind of stayed with you, but what's the one thing no one warned you about?
I think for me, it was important to actually learn for myself, because nobody told me, that it requires as much EQ as it does strategic clarity to be a decent leader. And I always thought if you have the best plan, you've worked it all out, you have all the data to back it all up, then that would actually be sufficient. But it's not. You need to show up as the person who's going to be collaborative, who's going to be collegiate, who's going to be able to communicate that plan effectively. And it's really important for people to understand the why. Why are they doing things? Because if they understand the why, you're far more likely to get things that are aligned to what you want to happen. And I guess when I first, people always tell you, you have to have the plan, you have to have, sort of as a leader, you need to be able to communicate. They give you all these big sound bites, but the reality is that it's beyond that. You have to get underneath the skin of the team of the people you're working with. You have to bring them on a journey with you. And, you've got to show up. How you show up matters. It's not just about what you say, it's about what you do, it's about what you look like. It's about your body language that they pick up on. All of these things, we're back to my swan again. You have to actually be able to deliver that confidence for them no matter what.
And with, and I totally agree with the why. I think the why it's Simon Sinek, a thought leader, he talked about the why, and then it's the how and the what, because the why connects people. It connects people on an emotional level. So as leaders, it's about being a great storyteller, and because stories, people have recall. People remember stories. When you mentioned about taking people on the journey, how do you know as a leader if people are on the journey with you? Like what do you look out for to be like, no, my message is landing, and they're enrolled in the why?
So I'm looking for people through their actions demonstrating to me that they're comfortable and trust in what I've said and created a framework for them. That they're so comfortable that they will push that envelope, that they will really come to me with new ideas. They'll be thinking creatively. They'll be very happy to be innovative rather than actually going for the really conservative strategy. And if you've got people who are engaged in that way and you see them actively trying to push, you kind of know you've got it right. It's when they're in their comfort zone and they're just doing the safe thing that you've probably not got it quite right.
And you mentioned the outer optics, which we discussed at the beginning, and it feels a really important one to underscore, because that EQ, people, you set the tone. When you walk into the room, how you show up, your face, your eye contact, your energy. I'm sure we've all experienced leaders that walk into a room where sometimes they're frenetic, frazzled, they're looking at their phone whilst they're speaking to you, and it's the impact that their actions and behaviours have on others. And EQ for me is part of that, is about empathy, putting yourself into the shoes of others, really giving thought to how do I want people to feel when they leave the room, and knowing that how do I need to be as a leader.
I think it's really important, and I've just started chairing a new firm, and for me it's been a really interesting journey to go from the exec to the non-exec, but the reality is the same skills are required and the same EQ is required. You may have some very senior people sitting around the table, but the reality is I still have to be aware of some people who are less likely to contribute than others. So I like to have an inclusive group. I like to have people feeling comfortable and that they trust me, that I value the opinion that they give me, and that in no way would I actually make them feel that their opinion wasn't valid when they gave their opinion. That's all really important at all levels. And so, whether you're with a team of juniors or a team of very senior management, it doesn't matter. The same requirement for EQ is there.
And that valuing other people's opinions, it's interesting. Having worked in the corporate space, I worked there for 20 years, it'd be interesting where you sometimes see people speak over others, or interject, and you think you've really now, limited the other, not limited the other person's thinking, but that, you can see people either retort, or otherwise others can shut down. You could miss some extraordinarily amazing ideas by simply not listening and not creating the right space for other people to be heard, because some of those opinions could be incredibly valuable.
Absolutely.
And how important is listening? I said the word listening there. Is that would you say that is something, I think great leaders are great listeners. Is that something that you'd say is in your arsenal of skills? Is it something you've learnt?
I think I've learned to listen properly. I think listening is one thing, actually hearing is another. So I hope listen a little more carefully and listen critically. So, you keep the comments inside until you've heard the entire sort of comments that people are making, and then respond to it. And sometimes you don't need a response at all. Sometimes you just need to listen. And sometimes I don't always do it. I am Welsh. I do tend to speak too much. So, the reality is that speaking is an easy thing to do, whereas listening is harder.
Yeah, it's so true. And and you said a second ago, sometimes it's recognizing when it's just important not to speak. And it reminded me, there's a chap called Justin Bariso. He's written a book on EQ. It's called EQ Applied. It's a brilliant book. And there was a 3-tip trick in there where let's say you're in a meeting and someone said something that maybe you don't agree with. And his 3 tips are, does this need to be said? That's the first one. Number 2, does this need to be said by me? And then third thing, does this need to be said by me now? Because maybe it does need to be said by you, but the now is like, this is more of a bilateral conversation rather than calling it out in the team. And those 3 questions really landed. I thought they're very, very simple, but quite profound in the coming from a place of consciousness, rather than knee-jerk reactions, which, are more emotional led.
And I think, I haven't read his book, but I think I probably should. The reality for me is the last bit of that is a really important piece of the puzzle. There are lots of things you can take offline, that you can take someone aside and you will get a far more productive reaction and response and future behaviour if you deal with it in private. And, in the political world in particular, it's all about impressions, and you don't want to appear weak by giving in. But actually, if you take someone aside privately afterwards and say, by the way, if you'd said this in this way, I think it might have landed better, then it's amazing how that has a huge impact. And it strengthens your relationship with that individual, but it also builds trust and confidence in everybody else because you haven't called them out and created friction in public at the time.
Yeah, very few people respond well to being called out in public. Typically doesn't go very well. And which makes me think about feedback. Feedback is a gift. It's a gift that's rarely given. Often when it comes to leaders, people want to give leaders the polished apple. And it's interesting, when I grew up in the corporate world, I assumed that at the most senior levels, everyone was always giving each other feedback, where actually it's often in that rarefied atmosphere where the least feedback is given. What advice would you give to people in terms of the art of giving, I suppose, constructive feedback?
And it's an interesting one because I worked at one of the big 4 for a number of years when I came out of public sector the last time round, and there was 360 feedback and 360 feedback regularly. So this wasn't just once a year appraisal stuff, it was a regular 360 feedback. And some of the feedback I found most useful were from the more junior members of my team, where they felt safe and empowered to give proper feedback. But the reality was you then realised how you come across. And, by all accounts, I can be quite scary. I don't think of myself as being scary. But, putting myself in other people's shoes, maybe what I think is sharing my knowledge and demonstrating, my expertise and knowledge publicly can be seen as to some people as intimidating. And just knowing that means you then convey things in a slightly different way. And, asking people's opinions rather than just telling them the way the world is is a really important part of my journey learning. And, coming out of politics back into business, it's a very different world in politics to that of a big business. And there were major lessons for me to learn at the time. And I hope I have learned and grown as a result of that. But the 360 feedback and the junior and your peers, for me, were actually more important to me as an individual necessarily than from the top. From the top, you have daily contact. You kind of, when I came in as a vice chair of a firm, you're already at a fairly senior level. There aren't many people above you. So you have that regular contact. You've got that daily feedback. You know whether it's going well or not. But the peers and sort of your team giving you regular feedback and feeling confident that they can give you that feedback was really important.
And I think, feeling confident they can give you the feedback. It's not asking for the feedback and then disagreeing with them. It's making them feel that they're, and also the safety. You mentioned the word trust earlier, that it's a trusted space. And one of Lance's team, they said that for their senior management team, they all had a reverse mentor. So someone who was, been in the company 2-3 years, in early mid-20s. And he shared that the reverse mentoring was so interesting because they've got different foundations, different perspectives. And that for him was the most valuable. And someone else shared that they always like to get feedback from a detractor as well, because I know when I was at JP Morgan, we had our 360s and we could select our reviewers. So I had clearly selected everyone that I got on really well with. I wouldn't have dreamed of asking for a detractor to give me feedback. And I'm sure things have changed since then, but that detractor, and this individual said you can learn as much from the detractor as you can from the champions.
I think it's really important to embrace different thinking and to embrace people who actually maybe have a contrarian view to yourself. And, I do that in all sorts of ways. My social media feed is full of people I vehemently disagree with. But I need to know what their opinions are and why they think what they do. And, it's important that I don't just have a very narrow prism that I'm looking through in life. And so I extend that to my business life. I want to know why people think the way they do and try and understand why they've come to a completely different opinion to the one that I might have done with the same data set. And, that for me is a fascinating journey. And I think being involved in politics for a number of years has helped me actually get over people's opinions in a way that maybe in business you are much more like-minded in one firm. The detractors tend to be minor detractors. They're not massively different to you in your outlook. Whereas, when you go into politics, I can tell you there are people who have very, very different opinions and ideologies to yourself. And understanding where they're coming from, for me, was a big first step of understanding how you then actually get over some of their concerns and get them around to your way of thinking. Because ultimately, that's what politicians need to do. You need to bring people along with you on a journey to your way of thinking.
And what you shared a second ago, I think is, I kind of thought about, it's holding the mirror up when there are the detractors. And maybe there is just there is a difference of opinion and two truths can be true at the same time. And I think there's an opportunity to be like, what might I be missing? Is there anything I'm not noticing? Because we don't know what we don't know. And it's so, as much feedback is the outside in, but also the inside out. And sometimes those detractors, there might be something that you're completely missing, a complete blind spot, but maybe a seed. So something's not significant. Nonetheless, it's worthy of exploring it a little bit more.
And I think you also need to make sure that when you do have that feedback from a detractor, you take it in the vein it's intended. So it's professional, it's not necessarily personal. And so to try and dissociate the personal from the professional is really important, because you can then move on once you've had that conversation with them.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they say feedback is the oxygen of champions. And when you look at any sports, whether it's football, rugby, cricket, they're getting, international level. They're getting, most levels actually, but feedback all the time from your teammates, from the coach, from the referee, from the crowds, and it makes them better. And I think in today's world, I used to, if someone said to me, Georgie, can I give you some feedback? I'm like, oh, holy moly's, I'm about to get fired. where actually we kind of need another word, because feedback we only get better when we know better. And that means it's either us seeking insight and information from others, or other people feeling they can actively share and disclose with us.
Absolutely, and I think companies need to actually take that to heart too. It's not about individuals, it's also about the work you might have just delivered for a client. So making sure you actually genuinely get feedback on the work that you've just done is really important, because how do you improve if you don't know where you need to improve? And so for me, part of moving into an advisory role when I came out of politics back in 2019, it was important for me to actually understand what the client valued in the piece of work that we delivered for them. What could we have done better, and what really already excelled. And actually being able to benchmark that was a really important exercise. And I think a lot of firms skip over the client feedback. They just tick a box. Whereas actually I always thought it was one of the most valuable things I could do.
Yeah. So what does the client most value? Like, what do they most value, to really make sure that's being amplified and that message is being communicated out?
Yes, and then you've got not only personal development and development of your team, you've also got business practice development, which is critically important in a service industry.
Yeah, it's interesting with client feedback. The people around you don't know what they don't know. And it could be the iceberg. They see the headline of the deal, or the headline of the what you've achieved, but what about the 5/7, like everything that's gone into that? So I used to think it was a complete meritocracy when I grew up, and that all our successes, they get recognized. And I slowly realized you have to be your own steward, whether it's your personal brand or making people aware of your successes. And you don't want to be the shrill self-publicist, because that's not attractive, but you can't be a shrinking violet and just assume people know. I want to pivot because leaders have many different qualities. And I was curious from your perspective in terms of what are some of the attributes you most respect in leaders?
So most of the great leaders that I've had the privilege of working with have been entrepreneurs. So they themselves have actually believed in something they've done enough to actually put their personal finances at risk and their reputations at risk, and have actually had the courage to stand out and to do this new venture. So for me, courage is a really big part of that. Intellectual curiosity. So people who actually really do want to know why things are happening and how you could do things differently. That intellectual curiosity for me is a driver for almost everything that I think the business world needs. Intellectually curious people. But when you've got courage and you've got intellectual curiosity, I think you also need a dose of humility. So I think it's really important that you recognise that when things start to work, it may have been your idea, it may be your company, but actually there's a team that's helped you deliver it. So great leaders for me have got that mix of the courage, the curiosity and the humility.
And it's interesting, the word courage, because as I look at your career, it is one of bold moves and courage. And yes, you've been identified for different opportunities, and it takes fortitude and a strength to be like, you know what, I can do this. So that word, as you said that, I thought that's you embody that word.
Well, it's interesting because I wouldn't identify myself with it. I wouldn't think I was courageous. I don't think I am the person who would take the risks. I ran a hedge fund for a while. I was a co-founder and ran a hedge fund for a biotech fund. And I can tell you, I was not courageous. Those traders around me tested my nerves daily. So for me, courage is not something that I necessarily would put as being one of my attributes. But interesting that others may see it differently.
No, I absolutely do. And you said there about testing, testing nerves. In organisations and politics as well, let's be clear, there's always going to be conflict, difference of opinions. How do you address conflict? And it's not necessarily about having a win-win outcome, but I don't think that's always possible, but the best possible outcome.
So from a professional point of view, I mean, it has to be head on. You have to deal with conflict in a professional environment. Immediately it's apparent that there is a conflict. But you have to do it respectfully. So if people realise you're coming at it with good intentions, I think, and they trust that you will manage the situation appropriately from both sides, I think that's important. You need to focus on the facts. You've got to make sure you've got the desired outcomes in mind when you're having difficult conversations. And, people have got diverse opinions and you have to embrace that. They don't always have to be the same. So conflict isn't always bad, but you have to manage your way through it. And for me, that therefore means, dealing with it. And those who know me well, particularly on a personal level, will say that in my personal life, I am the world's best ostrich. When it comes to any form of personal conflict, I will put my head in the sand for as long as I can feasibly get away with it. So much so that my best friend actually uses it as a verb, that Kay's ostriching again. So, it's quite odd where there's a difference between my professional and my private life, where I will take one, head on, and the other I will put off as long as I possibly can.
It's interesting how different personas, personal and professional, and the professional piece there, it really, what you're saying that, deal with it head on. Like when you're a senior leader, it's non-negotiable. Some of these conversations, you actually don't have the ability to put your head in the sand. There is no choice. But you mentioned a really valuable point there, lead with fact. Take emotion out of it. I think when emotions come into play, they can be highly triggering. And before you go in, you said, what are the desired outcomes? I think it's, what is the end state that I'm looking to achieve? And knowing that, what are the facts that I need to bring in? And I don't know if people always think about the end state. They go in preparing what they want to deliver, but what's the outcome I'm driving?
Critically important, particularly when you've got people that don't necessarily see eye to eye within a team.
Yeah, and I wouldn't it be wonderful if the world was free of conflict? Sadly, we don't live in that place. And I think it's one of those skills, the more you exercise it, it's like a muscle, the stronger it becomes.
And you have to trust your instincts to a certain extent too. Do your planning, but trust your instincts in the moment.
Yeah, the instincts, our third brain, our intuition. And look, you've held many different senior roles in politics, in the financial world and the business world. There is a scrutiny that comes with the seat. We live in a world now where it is a cancel culture. Things you say can be evergreen, you can be misrepresented very easily. So it takes a certain kind of person, I think, and leader to be able to cope with the scrutiny of the seat. I mean, there's lots of great things, but I think it's going into these seats, these roles are open-minded. What's been your mechanisms for dealing with that?
So I had the joy of being in the public eye for 10 years as an elected politician. And I can tell you that the scrutiny of the public is actually so great and such a pressure that it changes the way in which you behave and the way in which you act. And I would say very clearly that I do, even today, on things I'm involved in, I do a Daily Mail test. And by that I mean, would I be happy for this to be on the front page of the Daily Mail? And if the answer to that is no, why am I doing it? And, the reality is that, if you always try to do the right thing for the right reasons, then you can defend why you've done it. And whether it's work or whether it's your personal life or anything in between, then I think dealing with scrutiny, if you've done the right thing, you can then actually defend it. And I think you could be strong and really stand up tall. But always check that you have done the right thing for the right reasons.
Yeah, the Daily Mail test. And it's, would I want my mum to see this on the front page of the Daily Mail? And I think it's having that, it's that power in the pause, isn't it? Before you, and you have to be very conscious, and I suppose the word's deliberate, because things can have repercussions. So there's the thoughtfulness that's needed. And that thoughtfulness is interesting because I think thoughtfulness requires time. And I think we're in a world where things are moving faster than ever before. Changes, it's acute. the playbook from last year is not necessarily the playbook for today. And when you've navigated, extreme periods of volatility and change in the past. What advice do you give to other business leaders in terms of how do you lead, how do you steer and create a steady ship in these moments?
So there was a phrase in Brussels that we used to use of never wasting a good crisis. And, that came about because we were in the middle of successive Eurozone crises. Things were going really badly wrong politically, things were going wrong economically, the financial crisis, then these successive Eurozone crises. There was a lot going on. So never waste a good crisis is something that not only works for a country or a political establishment like the EU, it also works for business. If you're going through a period of significant volatility, uncertainty, then use it as an opportunity to actually have change for good. And that, for me, if your values are intact, stay true to your values at all time, make sure you've got trust and integrity with your team. But the reality is you can use that as an opportunity to actually build back better. And I genuinely think that, we sometimes see a crisis as a completely negative thing. But actually, out of every crisis, you usually get the opportunity to have a better outcome. And so I really do think that we should, in some ways, embrace that uncertainty and utilize it as the vehicle for change.
Yeah, and it's interesting. In periods of change, I think you really see leadership come through, because in fair winds, I'm not going to say it's easy to lead, but it's easier. I think when it's turbulent times, you then see, who can navigate those storms.
And it's all about information and communicating what you can. So if you're in a particular crisis within a business, you may not be able to share everything with all of your team, but the reality is you can share a lot. And so making sure that you've got those open channels of dialogue, you're constantly talking to both your team and your stakeholders, and whether that's your clients or your regulators, or, if you're a country, then, it's going to be your members of your constituency. All of these things, there are common links here. You need to communicate properly, but stay true to yourself, stay true to your company's values, to your personal values, and then, managing that uncertainty, whether it's for your country or for your company, becomes much, much easier.
And transparency is equity. It's a saying that I've borrowed off, I think it was Rick McVeigh from Market Access. And I love the transparency is equity, because what you're saying, communicate what you can. Otherwise, people will fill in the gaps. And where possible, you want to avoid those unhelpful water cooler moments that can quickly, can be pretty cancerous for an organisation. So as much as you can, and I think it's that chief repetition officer or chief reinforcement officer. In times of change, people are sometimes thinking about, we're supposed to be thinking about COVID, staying alive, keeping your family safe. So you have to keep repeating the message, because you can't assume because you said it once at a town hall that everyone knows, it can repeat the message back. And in times of change, there are decisions that need to be made, and there'll be times where you have to make decisions. Incomplete data, you might not even know what corners you need to be looking around. How do you make decisions when everything is moving so fast?
So when I've got all the facts to hand and I've got a good pack of data, I can be exceedingly decisive and very urgent in my decision making. The reality is that you don't always have all of those facts to hand, and you have to make certain suppositions. You've got to actually draw and infer from certain things. So, if you've got multiple decisions coming towards you, triage them. I mean, there's a reason why medics triage when they're in a situation of difficulty. You need to make sure that you've prioritized the right decisions at the right time. And you don't always get it right, but you also need to then trust your team. You need to delegate where appropriate. So you may not be the best person under that particular set of circumstances to make the decision, even if you are the boss. So delegate it to the person who does have more information than you and can actually do it effectively and efficiently where you might actually not be able to do so.
And I think of the Navy SEALs saying here, like, slow is steady, steady is fast. Use the word triage. And that's slowing things down, to your point. Where do I need to delegate? Where do I need to empower others? What's a decision only I can make? And that triaging, yes, it might not slow things down, but it's just, let's collect the information we have before we decide on the plan.
Absolutely. And then, you're making the best decision that you possibly can with the information you currently have. It's never going to be perfect, but at least you've paused. I go back to your pause. It's really important that you, in that moment, pause to actually think about what is the right way forwards.
I think it's Jeff Bezos who has the one door, two door. So, he goes between reversible and irreversible decisions. The irreversible is, let's say I sell my house. Well, I can't just buy that back. That's, again, a mechanism by how he applies weighting, because the irreversible is maybe being a little bit more judicious versus the ones that are reversible.
That makes sense to me, but I've never really... I take a very long time to make decisions that involve my personal life. It's on a work front, they tend not to be... You don't make them in isolation. Whereas, buying or selling my house would be a personal decision with nobody else who would necessarily input to that decision making. My children might disagree now, but given they're in their 20s, I would say it's now my decision to make. The reality is, in work, it's rarely yours alone. You're always going to have a senior management team around you. You're always going to have people who actually can advise you. You pay them for their advice, let them give you it. So, for me, in a work situation, it's rarely, for me, that irreversible decision, unless you're a Jeff Bezos and, your entire building of your firm is because you've made those decisions at the right time.
Yeah, and you mentioned your parents and children there, and I met your mum when you had your introduction to the House of Lords. So you're Baroness Swinburne. I always love to introduce you to everyone as my friend Baroness Swinburne. And I know you're very humble, so that you wouldn't always introduce yourself as that title. But what if for your mum, and obviously if your father was still alive, what do you think they're most proud of when it comes to you?
So I think they're probably proud of the fact that I've stayed true to my personal values, while striving to actually make an impact in the big wide world. I think sort of it manifested that day of my introduction to the House of Lords. I wasn't expecting the phone call from Rishi Sunak asking me to go into the House of Lords. It came completely out of the blue, and 3 weeks later I was being introduced into the House of Lords. An institution that I'd only ever looked at from afar, hadn't really understood how great an honour this was going to be. And I think having my mother there and having friends and family around me, when I got to do my oath of allegiance to the King and got to do it in Welsh unexpectedly, I think that was the time I knew my mum was proud. So, yeah, you've got me all emotional now. But no, that really was one of those unexpected things in life that I was glad that at least my mum was around to see.
But it circles back to what you said at the beginning, reach for the stars, and you thought you didn't think that was possible, and yet if I look at everything you've done with politics and finance and the business world, like you've been an extraordinary leader, and for me, I personally was like, it's so wonderful that that's acknowledged publicly.
And it doesn't always happen. I know a large number of people that I would actually have put well ahead of myself on that list of that particular honour. So, I'm very grateful, and again, it's humbling to be given that responsibility in the House of Lords.
And I always like to close by having a quick fire round so people get to know a little bit more. We've had a lot about you today and your some of your key lessons and stories and insights. This is more on a human level, and so several questions here. Typically, the first thing that comes into your mind. There's no right or wrong, not competition. So the first one is a leader you admire.
Oh, there's quite a few. So I'm Christine Lagarde. She's really intellectual. She's calm in a crisis, and she is a phenomenal female mentor.
Okay, so Christine Lagarde, calm in a crisis. She's got lots of ways to be tested there. And what do you think people think of you when they meet you for the first time?
So I'll answer a slightly different question. What I like them to think, as opposed to what they necessarily do, is that I'm maybe thoughtful, strategic, and maybe collaborative.
A quality you most value in others?
Integrity.
Yes. Your go-to drink in a coffee shop?
Oh, black Americano every time.
Favourite coffee shop?
I have a real penchant for Black Sheep coffee.
Black Sheep's good. Yeah, they also do really good muffins. Are you an early bird or night owl, or somewhere in between?
A night owl.
Are you? See, I'm a morning lark.
Nah, I'm definitely a night owl. If I need to really put my thoughts down and really think strategically, I do it usually after about 8 o'clock at night.
And what time do you go to bed?
I'm forced to be a lark rather than a night owl. So these days I'm in bed by 11, but historically it wouldn't have been until 1 o'clock.
And okay, and if you go to bed at 11, what's the last touch point you have with your phone?
I do check my phone before I go to bed. I have no boundaries. It is alongside my bed and it's switched on all night. I'm a legacy of my children needing things in the middle of the night. And I was away in Brussels for many, many years whilst my children were quite young. And so I would always have my phone on, always the volume up, never night setting. So if anybody ever needed me, I was always available.
Yeah, I think when it comes to children, to your point, my phone's with me. But I did speak to a CTO recently. She sleeps with 3 phones under her pillow. So let's be clear, we're doing okay with the phone on by our bedside. Would you classify yourself as an introvert or an extrovert?
Probably a bit in between. I really take my energy from being with other people. So I love that communal sort of sharing. But I recharge usually walking up the Malvern Hills with my dog.
Yeah, I'm with you. Walking with a dog, mind you, mine are naughty, so they typically don't stay with me. How best to get your attention? Email, phone call, what's the best mechanism?
Email, because I can deal with it anytime. Even if you're a lark as opposed to a night owl, I can send you an email at night.
One thing you can't work without?
Really old school here, pen and paper.
Yeah, I do. I'm trying to migrate everything, but it's even books. I buy books rather than Kindles. All right,
if I need to get down some strategic thoughts, if I need to actually write a policy paper, I have to go back to pen and paper.
And do you think that's does it take longer in the process because you can't just edit, cut, paste, or is that where the download is just more profound?
It's more profound. There is a connection seemingly directly between my brain and my hand that flows onto a piece of paper. It doesn't happen on a keyboard.
Yeah, same here. Best book you've read this year? Or best thing you've watched on TV if you're more of a...
So I've been reading a lot of AI books recently. So I've just finished actually on the audio version of it, Supremacy. That was written by Palmy Olsen. So I'm trying to understand how we've got to where we are with AI. And then I can start to plan what needs to happen going forwards, particularly in the financial services sector.
Okay, that feels like one I need to read as well. And last question, what is and I haven't prepared this because I'm feeling into the question. It's something about your children. What is the one lesson you want your children to take from you through their lives?
That nothing is unachievable. If you set your mind to it, you can go out there and make a really, really good stab at getting it. I genuinely think, we're back to reach for the stars. You genuinely can reach for the stars. And do you know what? If you don't reach the stars, you're going to have reached a pretty decent place.
Yeah, it's true. It's about you said earlier, stretching yourself and seeing what's possible, being boundless. Look, I always love our conversations. You are just, again, such you've just been such an incredible person in my life. So I can't thank you enough for that. And also for sharing, your insights and lessons today, because I know how many people are going to benefit. And I truly believe a single insight can shift everything for someone. And there are so many insights here. So I look forward to more of the world hearing your brilliance. So thank you so much, Kay.
Thank you, Georgie.